welcome to this latest episode of the Mufasa Sports Clubs. I'm your host Mufasa, and as you already know, I want to ask you guys to please continue to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Make sure you like the videos, you comment on them, you leave us your opinion. Continue to share it among your friends and family, and let's continue growing this community. Today we are going to be having an off-season guide or overview of what the Philadelphia 76ers need to do in order to get back to contention next year. I was waiting on, obviously I'm a Philadelphia 76er. I'm a Sixers psycho, as we call ourselves, and I actually was waiting to see what the outcome of the lottery was going to be before I do this off-season overview. And I'm just gonna be giving my opinion on what needs to be done during this off-season. So once again, super pumped, super excited that we were able to get the third pick in the draft. The chances were really small at the beginning. Everybody was just praying for us to at least keep the pick, since it was a top 6 protected pick. So great W on that end, and then we end up being able to climb up to the third pick. And I think there's, like I said in the previous videos, there's pretty good talent. I'm not necessarily going to call them franchise-changing talent, but definitely pretty good talent with the aptitude of possibly being a franchise-changing talent, in my opinion. There's been a lot of chatter online, a lot of conversation regarding who needs to be picked at 3 by the Sixers. We are going to be talking about it. We are also going to be looking at the roster as it is right now and what needs to be done on that end, especially related to, based off of what the draft, the player that we get on the third pick is. I think based off of that, that would actually mostly impact what the rest of the season will be, or what the off season rather. Because I heard Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Sixers, talk about it, and he said he's not drafting for needs, but he's drafting for talent. And I 100% agree with him on that end. I think you just go ahead and pick the best available player, in your opinion, at that number, and you just make the necessary adjustments after that. So I think it's a clear-cut situation here. We all know Cooper Flag is going number 1 to the Dallas Mavericks. I think the 2 best players after Cooper Flag in this draft, especially when it comes to upside, when it comes to star potential, in my opinion, the 2 best players after Cooper Flag are Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Not necessarily in that order, but I think the 2 players from Rutgers University, even though they didn't have a great campaign in their first and only year in college, I think that the 2 best players left, especially when, like I said, you take in consideration star potential and longevity, long-term outcome results. I think you might have some players in that draft that are able to contribute right away in a team that are maybe more NBA ready. But when you're looking at the upside, I think these 2 are the clear-cut favorites for the top 2 and 3 picks, basically, right after Cooper Flag. So my suggestion here for the Sixers would definitely be either Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper, depending on who the Spurs draft at number 2. If the Spurs happen to not draft any of these 2 players, which I highly doubt it would occur, even if they happen to like the conversation is trending right now, even if they happen to trade their pick in a Giannis Antetokounmpo mega trade, for instance, I still think Dylan Harper goes number 2. If it does not go number 2 and Ace Bailey doesn't go number 2, then it becomes a tougher conversation. And I'll be letting you guys know later on, if that scenario occurs, who I'm going with. But let's assume that the Spurs go ahead and drop Dylan Harper at number 2, for instance. And actually, let me preface all this by saying everything that we're going to be talking about right now obviously relies a lot on what the health conditions of Joel Embiid and Paul George are going to be for that upcoming season, especially if you're thinking championship, right? If you're not thinking championship and you're just thinking long term, which is also part of my plan, because you got to start just, building but also forecasting, especially as a GM. I think that's part of your job. You can't only just think about the present, but you gotta also start thinking about the future, because we all know Joel knee condition at the moment. We know Paul George is pretty old and doesn't have a lot left in terms of high performance. So you gotta start building, which Daryl Morey has started already with the change of trajectory that he had at the trade deadline by, getting a guy like Quentin Grimes, Jared Butler, and Lonnie Walker. These players that he was able to bring in definitely were plus for the Sixers in terms of youth. And he also mentioned that, they were gonna continue to be younger. And I think if I remember, he was saying most of the players on the rotation would probably be, in their second, third year and 25 and under. So I think that's the right way to go. I think you need to find players that could help you right now, contribute right now, but also be cornerstones for your future when you decide to move on from Joel Embiid and Paul George, or if they happen to, not being able to perform at least up until their contract expire. So clearly, bad contracts in my opinion for both Joel and Paul, especially for Joel in the sense that he still had some years and you weren't sure about. I mean, Daryl says he was sure about how the knee was going to react. Got some confirmation from doctors, but this year was a failure. It is what it is. We're looking forward. But given the fact that you have those 2 huge contracts for the next 4 years with Joel and Paul, you need to build through the draft because you don't have enough cap space, and you have an owner in Josh Harris who is not necessarily a big fan of overspending. He's not Joe Lacob from the Warriors. He doesn't like paying luxury taxes, but I think if there's a year where Josh Harris will probably have to accept that he needs to pay the luxury tax at least once, it will have to be this year. I think you give it a shot and see how far you can go by making sure that you establishing a roster that has enough talent to even sustain a Joel Embiid missing 40, 50 games in the regular season, with the hope that maybe he gets to the playoffs and can go for a month or 6 weeks and hopefully winning a championship. You could go with the Kristaps Porzingis in Boston approach last year when they won the chip, for instance. But you have to have a roster that can cater to these kind of needs. And I remember, at the beginning of the season when the whole conversation came with Joel missing some time and not being able to play in back-to-backs, and how crazy the chatter became with this whole thing. I don't think it's much of a big deal because you really just have about, I think, 14 back-to-backs we had last year. So when you think about it, if Joel is healthy, I didn't think that it was going to be a scenario where he's not playing any of the back-to-backs. I think what you do is he plays one, part of the back-to-back, and the second game he sits. Or if he sits the first game, he plays the second one. But I would even go with the better approach, in my opinion. Maybe you limit his minutes during the regular season. Instead of him averaging 30, 35 minutes, maybe you cap him at 25, 28 minutes a game. Regardless of the outcome of the game, you cap him at 25, 28 minutes a game, and then you see how it goes, because it's clear that, I'm hoping that, the scope that he had this offseason helps him stay on the floor, because he's a tremendous player. But just as a cautious approach, I think this is how you should be going, and that's exactly why you need to have some competent center to back him up and allow him to sit and not necessarily want to play Superman when he is in the game. So with that being said, I think the emergence of Adem Bona this season has been really great. I think he was by far the best inside defender within the paint of the Sixers. Really good in shot blocking. Was struggling with fouls at the beginning of the season, but with more games played, he got better on that end. He was really the only one who was making, opponents think twice before driving to the paint and trying to score a basket that way. So I think you need to give him a bigger role next season. Andre Drummond, unfortunately, also dealt with some injuries this year, but did not really deliver even when he was playing. I was expecting him to be super dominant, in rebounds, but he hasn't necessarily delivered that much. And besides the rebounding, it's really tough on Andre Drummond, especially at that age now. I think he's past his 30s, probably 31 or 32. But I think you just need to find a way to get rid of his contract. I think you might need to, get a team like the Nets involved. They have a lot of cap space. I know he played there in the past. There was a trade, the Ben Simmons trade, where Drummond was already traded from Philly to New York at the time. Maybe you get a team like that or any other team who could be interested in a salary dump and get rid of his contract. He has, I think, $5 million that he's due this year, and then he's on an expiring contract because he's an unrestricted free agent the following year. But you need to find a way to get rid of him. I think what you do with the 35th pick, I believe we have in the second round of this draft, is you try to get a great center, well, not necessarily a great center, a great prospect, a player of 6'11", 7 foot, who could rebound the basketball and could block shots, who could control the paint and at least impose some kind of fear. He doesn't have to be Embiid on the offensive side, but at least defensively, your center has to be able to rebound the basketball, has to be able to block shots. You pair this guy with Adem Bona and they share minutes when Joel is not playing, and when he's playing, they are in competition to figure out who is going to be the backup for Joel when he's playing and when he's on the bench, whether it's foul trouble or just rest during a regular game. I think it's super crucial for you to do that with that 35th pick. There's a couple of prospects in terms of centers that you can find around that 35th pick, and I think the scouting team should be focusing on a center for that second round pick. If you don't want to go that route and it's not going to be too expensive, my ideal dream would be a guy like Walker Kessler from the Utah Jazz. But Danny Ainge has proven that he's super tough when it comes to contract negotiation. Walker Kessler is close to the end of his rookie deal, so he's going to be commanding some kind of money, not necessarily big money, but commanding some kind of money in the future. So it's either you take the leap of faith, go see what a trade might look like with the Jazz for Walker Kessler, and if it's something that fits then you might bring Walker Kessler as a backup center for Joel. He could play the center, he could play the power forward position, and he would be perfect to alleviate the defensive task on Joel. I think him and Bona, for instance, is a good committee to back up Joel on a night-to-night, and also when he's out for a game or two. So if you can find a guy like Walker Kessler, or even the Golden State Warriors, I think a guy like Trace Jackson Davis, who is also still on the rookie contract, can be able to help Bona with that committee to be able to back up Joel when he's out or when he's resting, and keep him within that 25 to 28 max 30 minutes a game during the regular season. So those are the guys that I would be targeting for that backup center position. We already have a plus with Bona being there and showing what he has shown last season with playing time. Now that we're done with that 35th pick and what the backup position needs to be for Joel. So again, you can't go with just two centers this season. You have to have at least three competent center that would give you meaningful minutes when they're on the floor. And I just think it's no longer the case with Andre Drummond, so you got to get rid of him and try to find a second center to help Adam Bona, who would be in his second year during this upcoming season. Now, back to the top three pick that we have. If the San Antonio Spurs select Dylan Harper, you go with Ace Bailey. I think it's pretty simple as that. I think Ace is a player with such a high motor, such a crazy athleticism that you cannot pass on him. I know there's guys like Trey Johnson, VJ Edgecombe, but first of all, I've been hearing a lot of crazy comments about his height at the combine and how apparently Rutgers listed him at 6'10", and now he's listed at 6'7" or 6'7.5" without shoes at the combine, and is somewhere around 6'9" with shoes. Who cares, guy? Who really cares? Seriously, let's not overthink this thing. I think if the Spurs get Dylan Harper, you go with Ace. You go with Ace because Ace is a guy who can help you, one, in your transition offense and transition defense. He has enough size to be a better rebounder than Embiid at this point. At least if he's playing alongside Embiid and Embiid can box out, he's a guy with his athleticism and his size can jump up and go grab a rebound. He could block some shots. He's done it throughout his career, whether it's in high school or college. He has a pretty high motor, like I was saying. He's a very good catch and shooter. And even the weaknesses that have been pointed out for him, I think those are things that he can work on. He's pretty skinny. He could put on some weight. I remember how Giannis Antetokounmpo was skinny when he got in the league. I'm not making any comparison with Giannis. Please do not assume that I'm comparing him or having like an upside of Giannis for him. If he does have it, great. I'm just saying, with the prototype of the body, he could put on some weight and not necessarily become as bulky as Giannis, but he could put on some weight in the NBA. When it comes to his ball handling, he could get better, and he doesn't have to have a great ball handling skills because he's not a point guard. He's gonna be playing the 3 or the 4, and most of the time he's not gonna be having the ball. He's gonna be given the ball in certain situations, but he's not gonna be running the offense. He's not gonna be coming up with the ball like a Maxey or Quentin Grimes if he stays, or Jared McCain, for instance. So he can get better at dribbling, ball handling, but I don't think it's a priority per se. I think he needs to be better around the rim. These are things those weaknesses. We have a guy in the name of Rico Hines with the Rico runs in LA that a lot of NBA players go to. He's on our coaching staff. I have no doubt that if we get a guy like Ace Bailey, for instance, he would help develop this kid and improve in these weaknesses that he had. But just in terms of raw talent, in terms of upside, and athleticism and star power, you can't miss. You can't miss on this guy. With the third pick, I think you take the risk with the hope that it pans out, and if it doesn't, you just embrace it. But you can't go with the thought that this guy is not going to work out. You can't go and say or regret 3-4 years down the line not picking this guy like we've been regretting with Jason Tatum that we could have drafted, or Jaylen Brown, for instance, in these past years. Yes, we had bust with Ben Simmons and Markelle Fultz for several reasons, but that's just part of the draft too. You have to take some risk, and I think if Dylan Harper is selected at the second pick with the Spurs, I think you go with Ace Bailey for the reasons that I mentioned, and you just need some size. The Sixers are always been physically dominated in the playoffs, whether it's by Boston or the Knicks last year. They're just not a good rebounding team, and they get out-rebounded and outmatched physically in these playoffs, and you need to have some youth, some players that will be able to do the dirty work, especially with the diminished Joel Embiid and an aging Paul George. You have to have some athletes around them. So I would go with Ace Bailey at 3 if Dylan Harper is selected by the Spurs, especially also because the backcourt of the Sixers right now is pretty decent, pretty good in my opinion. Right now you have Quentin Grimes, Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, and who else am I seeing here? Let me see. Jared Butler, Lonnie Walker as your guards, whether it's like shooting guards or point guards, and also Kelly Oubre, who could play the 2 at some point. I'm not gonna count on Eric Gordon and Kyle Lowry because I'm hoping for them to be out of this team. I hope they retire or just go look for a deal with a different team. I don't want them to come back, so I'm not counting them. But that's a pretty interesting backcourt that we have, and those guards are already pretty good for you to necessarily draft a guard again, in my opinion. Now, if the Spurs manage to get Bailey at 2 instead of Dylan Harper, then you draft Dylan Harper at 3. I think Dylan Harper is a great prospect. I can see him with the Cade Cunningham comp in the NBA right now. Very good size, 6'6", 6'7" point guard who is very shifty, very crafty, and does not get sped up. He plays at his own pace, has a very nice vision, and bigger guards are just successful in the NBA because most of the time they are a matchup problem for the opposing team. So if Ace is there, is picked up at the Spurs, you go with Dylan Harper, and then you figure out your front court with the Sixers by making sure that you trade for a power forward. I think it's crucial for you to bring Gershon Yabusele back. You have to sign him back. You have to sign Quentin Grimes back. I think if you do get Dylan Harper, you then have a backcourt of Quentin Grimes, Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, and Dylan Harper. That's a good 4 core that you have throughout the season that you can alternate, and most of these, they're all pretty much combo guards. They could both shoot. They could all shoot the basketball and run an offense. So that would be a pretty good nucleus in terms of guard to be able to get better and go through the regular season and even perform in the playoffs. But the only issue with drafting a guard in the likes of Dylan Harper, for instance, is you still will have to get a bigger player for the front court because you will be limited. Provided that Yabusele comes back, you will only have Paul George, Yabusele, Justin Edwards, who has been a very good surprise this year, and that's about it. Of course, you could play Kelly Oubre at the small forward, but I think if you're aspiring to a championship, you need to have another power forward that you have to bring, especially again somebody who can shoot, rebound the basket, and help Joel Embiid when he's on the court in terms of rebounding, because at this point I think you just need to ask Joel to at least box out if he can't get the rebound, and also to be able to score when Joel is out, because like we were saying, the two backup centers that we will have are not necessarily guys that will count on offensively. So, guys like Santi Aldama, who's about to be a free agent, I think, with the Grizzlies. Bobby Portis, I think, is the guy that you could be looking at. Naz Reid from the Timberwolves. Of course, all of these guys have higher chances of, getting re-signed by the teams, but I'm just giving the prototype of the kind of front court guys that you need to get if you do draft a player like Dylan Harper, for instance, because yes, you would have, solidified your backcourt, but your front court would still be a little thin for you to be able to compete at a high level in the playoffs. So you will have to make some trades or sign some a prototype, a player like the ones that I just mentioned, in order to be more competitive. So I don't have any problem drafting Dylan Harper, but if you gotta ask me between the two, which one addressed the biggest need that we have right now, it is Ace Bailey. And if you don't draft him, then, or if the Spurs get him, then I'm perfectly fine with getting Dylan Harper. I think people are making a big deal of them not making it to the NCAA tournament, and I'm like, guys, let's not forget that Anthony Edwards didn't make it to the NCAA tournament either. So that doesn't determine what your fate is going to be in the NBA. Like, we cannot just put the ceiling at bust just because they haven't made the NCAA tournament as freshmen at Rutgers. So yes, the expectation was great, high when they first committed to Rutgers, but come on, guys, we can't do that. So these are the guys that I think you will have to get. Guys that I think they need to, by all means, re-sign, in my opinion, are Quentin Grimes and Gershon Yabusele, and that's why I was saying Josh Harris might have to accept and agree to pay the luxury tax at least this year, because when you take a team like the Knicks with Karl Anthony Towns making $50+ million, Jalen Brunson and OG Anunoby is close to $40 million. What's his name? Brunson took a friendly deal at around $35 million. You got Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart both making $20+ million, and you still have Mitchell Robinson somewhere around $8 million a year. This is the top 5 plus somebody coming off the bench. When you look at the roster for the Sixers, Joel is making 55 this upcoming season. Paul is making 51. Tyrese will be making 37, and that's about it. Right after that, you got some free agents. Some vet minimum contracts, and Kelly Oubre, who was at the mid-level exception this year, I think, with $8 million. So you have to spend some money. The Warriors have proven it. The Nuggets are a very expensive team right now. The Lakers don't mind spending money. Josh Harris have to, if he's really serious about winning this championship, he has to at least accept to pay the luxury tax for a year. You can't just be playing around and then at the deadline make some trades just to be under the tax and avoid paying that tax. I think with the catastrophic season that we had, the fans kind of deserve this for at least a year, Mr. Harris. And then after that, we could see whether it was the good call or not. But you have to give it a shot. And I think I would be fine with us being capped at the first apron. If a first apron team at least this season, if it has to be. But I think you have to bring Yabusele back as a backup four. I don't think he necessarily starts as a center. As a power forward, you need to get somebody better, in my opinion, or at least put him in competition with someone. And you got to bring Quentin Grimes back too. He's a restricted free agent, so if any team, and the Knicks are the Nets are the only team with cap space this year. If any team is not giving him an offer sheet, a crazy offer sheet of like $20 million, for instance, you have to find a way to bring him back. Match the offer sheet that he gets if it's reasonable, of course. But you have to bring him back. You have to bring Yabusele back. And in order to do that, I think you got to get rid of, like I said earlier, Andre Drummond's contract. Kelly Oubre is still a question mark for me because I think he's very useful when in the right situation where he's not asked to do too much. He could play the 2. He could play the small forward. He can even play the power forward sometimes, even though he's undersized for a power forward. So very reliable player, very good player when he's within the confine of a role player and doesn't have to do too much because of injuries. For salary reasons, like they always say, this is a business. You might need to move on from him, but again, that depends on the pocket of Josh Harris and how far he's willing to go. But I don't necessarily want him gone. I think he could be very serviceable. So that's my only question mark. But my certainties are Yabusele and Quentin Grimes have to come back. I'm hoping for Paul George to at least be reliable this season, come back and be productive. People are always writing players off after the trades, and it's just crazy. I remember when Kyrie Irving signed with the Dallas Mavericks for the first 6 months, everybody was like, they can't play together, this is impossible, blah blah blah. And then next thing you know, they're in the NBA Finals and everybody is praising them. Jimmy Butler is not a good fit with the Warriors. Next thing you know, yes, you're going to tell me they were bounced out by the Minnesota Timberwolves, but Steph didn't play for the 3 remaining games of the series, or 4 remaining games, whatever. He got hurt in game 1. But when you think about the 20 or 30 games that they played together after the trade of Jimmy, this is a good trade. This ends up being a good trade. So you can't just go off of the first year and, think that this is not going to work or George is a bust already. No, this is a very high skilled player. Yes, a little older, but I think you give this roster a chance with him and Joel one more year. If after this year you're still dealing with nagging injuries like that, or they're still not performing, then you might think about moving them. Because quite honestly, I don't even know who is taking them right now in the trade. With all the craziness I'm hearing, oh, we gotta trade Embiid, we gotta trade Paul George. Relax. This is not how things work. It's not gonna be that easy. So I don't think there's, especially with just the Brooklyn Nets being the team with cap space this season, they're not going, they're rebuilding, so they're not taking on these salaries, even if you give them first round picks. I doubt it. Those are like 4-year contracts. Those are like $200+ million commitment. So you have to at least eat one more year of these contracts in the hope that it turns out good and maybe you continue that route, or you gotta at least take it, and then if it doesn't work, they maybe have 2 more years left or 3, and then the contract becomes easier to move. So Paul coming back, Joel coming back, Tyrese is there, Oubre question mark depending on the scenario. Eric Gordon gotta go, according to in my opinion. Kyle Lowry gotta retire. If it's me, you could find him a position in the coaching staff, great, but don't want to see him on the court. Lonnie Walker has a contract anyway, so we'll be on the roster. Jared Butler, don't mind him on the roster, but if needs to be moved because of money, fine, you go ahead and move him. Jeff Dotson Jr. gotta go. Drummond gotta go, like I said. Ricky Council gotta go. You gotta get rid of these players and try to, find money getting rid of these contracts to hopefully be able to re-sign Yabusele and Grimes, with the hope that Josh Harris is willing to go a little deeper in his pockets Josh Harris, this is not just your only team. I know that you're the owner of the Washington Commanders too, but Sixers fans would appreciate a little more commitment here and dig in a little more deeper in your pockets, like we see other owners do with the team. So at least for a year, for us to see what this can be. I know that there's been some major commitments with Paul George and Joel and Maxey, but you gotta strengthen that roster and bring these guys back, in my opinion, in order to be competitive and hopefully turn this whole thing around. And why not go for a championship run? I've seen the Warriors do it. I'm not comparing the Sixers to the Warriors, but I've seen them being very bad and get some high peaks in I think it was 2020, and then 2 years later come back and win a championship. So I have faith that we get more games out of Joel and Paul George this season, especially if they manage well with a guy like Bailey and bringing these guys back with the scenarios that I mentioned. And if both Bailey and Dylan Harper are available at 3, like I said, I think you go with Ace Bailey because you have these guards, and I think these are competent enough guards to help you get to the playoffs between the 4 or 3 that I mentioned earlier. So this is what I think needs to happen with the 76ers this offseason. And Jalen Hood-Schifino, these 2-way contracts, they could all move. No disrespect. They could all move, go find a way in other teams, but you have to find a way to bring Yabusele back. You have to find a way to bring Quentin Grimes back. And then by drafting a young player like Ace Bailey or Dylan Harper, you're giving yourself a chance to get better. And honestly, I could care less about what these scouts say nowadays, because you can't rely too much on what these reporters and scouts say based on about some players, because there's no way for you to explain to me why Nikola Jokic, for instance, has been drafted in the 2nd round. That means some of these scouts also can be wrong. They could be right, but you can't take their words as biblical words. No. I've been saying a lot of things about Ace, a little less about Dylan Harper, but again, it's not because there's a notorious scout who said something out there that I hope Daryl Morey doesn't go and draft this kid, because we've had instances, whether it's Nikola Jokic in the 2nd round during his draft. Giannis Antetokounmpo was drafted very low too. So you have to take the swings that you need to take. And like I said, also in that 2nd round pick, you gotta get a center or try to make a trade with the Warriors or the Utah Jazz for these guys out there. So thank you again for sticking with me throughout this episode. I appreciate your support. Like I always mention, please continue to subscribe to the channel. Give me your feedbacks in the comments on what you think the Sixers should do. Share the video among your community, and let's go Sixers, guy. Have a great one.